A shared dataset is a way to insulate a report builder user from the technical details of a query, but letting them format and use the data as they wish in a report. You can think of a shared dataset as a kind of view or saved query, one that always returns results based on the current state of data on the server. The report builder has design and run views, but it also has a third view, a dataset design view. As the name implies, this view lets you create and edit shared datasets. It's easily the most obscure, well-hidden feature of Report Builder, for reasons that, frankly, I just can't begin to fathom. Yet it's an extremely useful feature that you'll definitely want to know how to access and use. The view is obscure because there is no shared dataset design button or any other button that changes to that mode. Nor do you directly get to it by right-clicking the Datasets node in the Report Data window and adding a new dataset. That just opens up a dialog box. Nor can you get to it by opening the Dataset Properties dialog box when you right-click an existing dataset and selecting Dataset Properties in the pop-up menu. In fact, I've not found any way at all to open this view from the Report Data window. You could spend a lot of time looking for it and never find it. And unfortunately, Books Online is not much help when you try to figure out how to get to the view. Okay, so you'll see shortly how to get to Report Builder's shared dataset design view. But first, you need a shared data source on the report server. This is essentially a saved connection string that reports and datasets can use to access data from a database. What I'm going to do now is create a shared data source to the AdventureWorks LT 2012 database, which will make that connection available to any report on the server. That's what the shared part of the name means. Okay, so here I am in Report Manager in the Home folder. I want to create a new data source, so I'll click on the button there. And that opens up this page. I'm going to name the data source AdventureWorks LT. Okay. Again, you can name it whatever you want. Name of the database is good. Although you could have, conceivably could have multiple data sources pointing to the same database, different credentials or whatever. And then I can add a description if I want. By default, it will enable this data source, but I can disable any data sources that I want to essentially make unusable for whatever reason. Once again, I want to connect to Microsoft SQL Server, but I have various options there as well. Now, unfortunately, the page doesn't have a handy button that helps you build a connection string. So you have to type in the connection string from scratch. So fortunately, this one is fairly easy. I'm going to set the data source equal to win7dev, or I could use localhost. Initial catalog is equal to AdventureWorks LT 2012. Okay, so hopefully I didn't make any typos there. AdventureWorks. Yeah, it looks good. Okay, so now I need to specify the credentials that are necessary to connect to this local instance of SQL Server. So generally when you're accessing them on a local server, Windows Integrated Security is probably the best choice. But you can also enter credentials using a username and password and so forth. Okay, and notice that you have various options here and so forth. Okay, and test connection is disabled. Oh, sorry. That's because I need to actually make a selection. The default selection there was credentials supplied by the user running the report. I get so used in SQL Server, Windows Integrated Authentication is the default setting, that when it's not, I always forget to change it. Okay, so then I can test the connection. Click on that there. No. And the connection was created successfully. And I'll click on OK. And now we have this new data source right there. Now that I have a shared data source, I can explore the Dataset Design view in Report Builder. The way you get to it is through the Getting Started dialog box that appears when you first start Report Builder or the similar New Report or Dataset dialog box when you click the Report Builder button in the upper left corner and select New from the pop-up menu. Okay, so that's the secret. So let's take a look at how that works. All right, to make things easy, I've restarted Report Builder, and here I am within the Getting Started dialog box that appears when you start Report Builder by default. And remember that you can turn this off if you really don't want to see it every time you start Report Builder. So what I want to do here is select New Dataset. And this will, theoretically, list all of the data source connections that are available. But in this case, nothing appears, so I need to browse other sources and have that one right there. And so that causes it to appear within this Choose list. Now, this does require that you have an existing data source, which is why I had to stop and go back in and create it within Report Manager. Okay, so let's step back here. Remember that I had to browse other data sources in order to look at this. I'm currently running the standalone version of Report Builder, and that's why I had to do that. It just doesn't seem to reliably pick up new report server components, so there's some sort of caching that's probably going on within that dialog box. But if I had used the Click Once version of Report Builder from the Report Manager, it does seem to pick them up reliably. So if you don't see any shared data sources that you know are there, you can just use the Browse button, or I suppose just fall back on using the Click Once version. One other thing about this dialog box. Notice the wording up here. It says choose a data source connection or model to create a shared data set. Earlier versions of Report Builder supported something called report models, which is a way of predefining the data that end users could build reports against. This was an enormously useful feature, but for some reason Microsoft deprecated it and partially removed them from reporting services in SQL Server 2012. You can still build and use report models, but you have to use the old Business Intelligent Development Studio, or BIDS, from previous versions of SQL Server in order to create those models. And then they aren't editable using SQL Server data tools, which is the way now in SQL Server 2012 and 2014 that you use to build reports as an alternative to Report Builder. So if you have any existing report models, you can still use them to create reports using Report Builder. But it's a dead-end road that you shouldn't go down for new projects and reports. You'll want to use shared data sets as a replacement for them. Okay? And the big reason is Microsoft deprecated them. They're starting to disappear from the tooling. Okay, so with all that done, I have AdventureWorks, it's selected, and I can use Create. And here, finally, we're in the Shared Dataset Design view. This is actually just a big query designer that you see in other reporting services tools, including an option to enter a query directly as text, run the query to make sure it returns the data it should, and set options for the data set. Now this is actually very similar to the Design a Query page of the New Table or Matrix wizard that you get when you add a table or a matrix to a report. Except that now you're creating a shared data set on the report server instead of something that's going to be embedded within this report definition. And then once you've created the data set, you can save the RSD file on a report server or to disk on the local machine or the network. It's very similar to how you manipulate report definition files. And then you can click the Select button in the Connections section of the Home tab, that's that button right there, in order to see what data source the data set is using or to change it. And then the Set Options button here opens the Shared Dataset Properties dialog box, which lets you select the fields in the dataset, set various options, create filters, and define parameters. All right, but keep in mind that when you use the Shared Dataset Design view, you're creating or editing a shared dataset, not one that's going to be embedded in the report. You have to deploy it to the report server before it's of any use in your reports or anyone else's who has access to that report server.